All right. Well, I think we are good to kick things off. So my name is Molly Gleeton. I'm the Director of Employee Engagement at PTG. The goal of this webinar is to provide insights into enhancing your employee experience, particularly in remote settings, with the challenges of virtual work and understanding the psychological aspects and effective tools. This becomes really crucial. Today, we're going to talk through understanding the impact of remote work on a modern business, swapping exit interviews for stay interviews, and then how you can make use of the tools you already have to create instant improvements. So we have a quick icebreaker to kick off the call. So if everyone can take a moment to participate, this is going to pop up in a second. So how's everyone's day going so far? You can answer this, and then we'll get started. All right, awesome. So housekeeping, again, just make sure you are muted. We have everyone muted, but if you need to come off mute, just make sure you remute yourself so we don't have any background noise. There is a Q&A window available if you have to ask questions. We will respond to questions in between slides. Please interact with us when the poll is posted. It helps us understand the audience. And if we can provide better content in the future, and then we'll have our contact information at the end of this webinar. If you have any questions, you're also welcome to ask questions throughout, but you can reach out to Riley and I afterwards if you have any questions after this that you want to kind of think through. We're also going to have a recording of the slides, so we will send this out to everyone after. Good to go to the next slide, Chris. So I have been with PTG a little over a year now and have several years of experience prior to this involved in human resources and employee engagement. I'm going to be focusing on the tools you can use to increase engagement. We also have Riley on the call who will walk us through the psychology around engagement and why it's important. I'll let Riley kind of give a little intro about who she is, and then we can get started on this slide.
Thanks, Molly. Hello, I'm Dr. Riley McCallus. I'm a visiting assistant professor in psychology at Furman. My specialty is industrial organizational psychology, so it is essentially the psychology of work and how people function at work from a psychological perspective. So I'll be walking through some of the scientific evidence and some recommendations.
Awesome. So as you can see from this first slide, employee engagement, really important. So in 2016, 4% of workdays were spent working from home. It was pretty rare to find a job that allowed work from home options or even hybrid options. Our mindset was like employees were the most productive while they were physically in an office. Obviously, then COVID happened and it pretty much rocked our world. Working from home spiked to 60%. And employees were like, hey, like, this is pretty nice. I can get a dog. I can wear sweatpants all day, snack, this, I want to keep this up. So when COVID started to die down, companies quickly found out that they couldn't just enforce fully in-office jobs. People really wanted that flexibility. So we had to adapt. And with that, figure out how can we ensure that employees keep engaged and excited about their jobs while they're not physically in an office. And this is hard. This is hard to do. So you can go next slide. So why is this important? Why is it important to have our employees engaged? When employees are engaged, they want to stay with the company. They are loyal to you and their performance increases, which in turn increases the company's performance, which is great. We all want that win-win. People want to see the business be successful when they are loyal to you. They're invested. So this example we have from Caterpillar, you can see through increased engagement, they had an $8.8 million annual savings and a $2 million increase in profit. We all want this. So, and with that, their customer satisfaction went up as well. So how do we keep our people engaged? How do we get to a level like what Caterpillar did? You want to make sure your employees have clarity around what they're responsible for doing. give them tools they need to do their work, and provide options for advancement and promote healthy relationships. So with that, what are they responsible for doing? Making sure we have clear job descriptions and you're having that communication with them. Give them the tools that they need to do their work. So do they have the proper setup so that they can have that communication with others? Provide options for advancement. So this is something that's really important. Turnover is about an average like 2 to 3 years. People are staying with companies. They're moving on to places where they feel that they can progress and grow. So it's important for us to give people those options long term. And then promote healthy relationships. People want to have friends where they work. They want to be able to talk not just about work things. So we want to promote that. So let's do another little poll. So Chris, can you put up questions? So how would you rate your current level of employee engagement in your organization? Let's see what everyone says. All right, let's see. So you'd rate it out of 3. That's not bad. That's not terrible. Well, hopefully today during this call, we can give you some tools and resources to take from this to increase that. But I'm going to let Riley talk next, and then we will get back into those actual tools that you can start using.
Thanks, Molly. So even that poll is interesting because I think it can be really difficult for organizational stakeholders to really gauge employee engagement. Even the word engagement has a lot of different meanings and interpretations depending on who you talk to. From a org psych perspective, we often think of it as the attention and the absorption in a lot of ways that employees bring to a job. But especially with remote work, that can be difficult to even zero in on and define. So fortunately, even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had a lot of data on remote work and remote teams and how the nature of the work context in remote teams can affect some of those dynamics. We have seen a lot of really positive outcomes from remote work for a long time. A lot of IO psychologists have actually been encouraging organizations to infuse more remote settings in. But of course, COVID kind of sent that into overdrive, and it wasn't a choice necessarily anymore for everybody. But that being said, I think it's worth noting that according to our empirical evidence, there are a lot of advantages and far more advantages than disadvantages to remote work from what we generally see. This is, of course, dependent on the industry, but if it is suitable and feasible, it's a really, really huge, attractive component to certain jobs and certain organizations. For example, I think we've seen over the past few years, especially since COVID, but also even in the last year or two, as COVID's kind of waned down a little bit, there seems to be this growing almost reckoning that we're seeing in workplaces for employees that both remote and non-remote workers are really rethinking what's important to them in a lot of different ways. They're rethinking what's important to them about work, about their future, multiple domains of life on a really, really large scale. And we've seen this in buzzwords and headlines, things like the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, where really these are sending off alarm bells and really scaring a lot of organizations, figuring out how to scramble and try to keep their employees. But I think what's important to note here and kind of focus on is that people are more and more interested in aligning their work with certain types of authentic outcomes for them and certain things that are personally important and relevant to them. And they want to try to align their work selves with that part of themselves. We as people really like feeling in alignment. We don't like feeling like something is out of alignment internally. So I think that's where a lot of this turnover, especially when we see employees only remaining in certain organizations for a short period of time, we're seeing a lot of these trends kind of follow suit. So one of the biggest components here that we've seen from a research perspective is a much larger focus on well-being. Physical well-being, of course, but especially psychological well-being has become a much higher priority for employees than it was perhaps several years ago. I think multiple components, in addition to the pandemic, have really highlighted how challenging life can be in general, work and non-work parts of our lives. But it's becoming more and more evident that a lot of employees aren't afraid to unapologetically put their own well-being first and to prioritize that, even in the context of their work lives. And it's really important for leaders to understand that not all employees are going to necessarily advocate for themselves like that, but even those who do, but especially those who don't, really need to be supported by their organizations however possible. And that lack of support is what we tend to see feeding into lower levels of engagement and motivation and productivity. So how do we do that? I'll kind of touch on the support component specifically a little bit later on, but some of the specific details with remote work that can be challenging are things like blurred boundaries. Working in the same environment in which you live can have its own set of really fantastic advantages, like wearing pajama pants or, getting to just make your own meals in your house, spending more time with your family, lower commute levels, lower rates of spending in a lot of areas of life. But it can also present some unique challenges, and employees who are still kind of getting used to that type of workplace style sometimes are still adapting to these. So the idea that a lot of work meetings are conducted online now, for example, they're often stacked very closely together. You have a meeting from 9 to 10, then 10 to 11, and then 11 to noon. Whereas previously, before a lot of people went remote, you sometimes had a little bit of a buffer between those kind of cutoffs. And there are very clear ways that we can kind of address those, but those boundaries and those blurring of these lines can be kind of a big hurdle and a chronic stressor for some people. So part of the outcome, part of the consequences that we see from these blurred boundaries can sometimes be from juggling multiple roles and just experiencing these stressful conditions in certain ways, especially mentally. You can find your employees at a higher risk of what we call languishing. And languishing, it can often be described as a sense of kind of this stagnation, a sense of emptiness. Oftentimes people describe it literally using the word or sound meh or bleh. It's not burnout because we tend to still see energy with these employees, and it's not quite on the spectrum of depression because there's often a hope component that is very much still in existence, but it's this almost middle ground that there's just a much lower level of interest, feelings of apathy, indifference. So this is a very large driver of lower employee motivation and engagement at work. So the extra kind of caution here is that if those feelings of languishing persist chronically, especially for an extended period of time, now those employees may be at a higher risk for things like burnout or turnover or other negative outcomes, not just for the employees, but for the organization. So question here is, what can we do to kind of right the ship? What can we do to address this problem, identify it, and find solutions to alleviate some of these feelings? Chris, you can go to the next slide if you. So as an organizational psychologist, we base a lot of our research and especially a lot of our interventions and recommendations in sound empirical evidence. We like to see the data, we like to see the scientific proof, so to speak, or at least scientific support. But one of the conversations and highlights that we've seen a lot lately is that as people, we really crave the feeling of growth and improvement, especially in our work lives. We work very hard to acquire our jobs. We've typically experienced a lot of training, taken part in a lot of investment, time, school, money elsewhere. And we enjoy the feeling of being challenged. We like feeling challenged and working hard to meet that challenge. And this can sometimes be referred to as a flow state. It is a feeling of genuine enjoyment in the task or activity you're engaging in. It's not too easy or too simple to be boring, but it's also not too challenging to be really stressful to the point that you want to disengage entirely. So it's this happy medium state that a lot of us can experience at work and outside of work with the right circumstances. But we often think of this growth mindset as being sort of a label or a predisposition for employees. And the truth is that that can happen. Some individuals can, of course, vary on these levels, but it's also very possible and doable to instill some of this flow and some of this growth into your organization itself, into the fabric of the culture. And one of the most important ways we can help employees find this type of flow state and boost engagement is helping to connect work to values and goals. Ideally, trying to craft this on as personal of a level as possible in your particular organization is going to be ideal. But it's this idea of connecting to kind of the bigger picture of our job, the bigger picture of our work. Who are we as an organization? What does our work mean to people inside this organization and outside? And what kind of impact are we having? And what kind of impact and purpose do we want to have? So these are the questions that can really tease out some of these larger determinants of what may predict whether an employee is going to feel engaged and experience engagement at work, or perhaps feel less engagement at work. So it's kind of trying to avoid falling into a really micro-focused mindset with specific job tasks and kind of backing up and keeping the why of the job in mind. And one of the classic theories in social and organizational psychology that illustrates this really well is what we call self-determination theory. This originated a few decades ago, but it's received ample support and evidence that a lot of the key factors here are persistent in what we've seen, even over many, many years of organizational change and trends. But some of the key factors I really want to zero in on with this theory in particular are the three essential human needs that you see listed here. And this theory kind of asserts that if these needs are not fulfilled, then we're going to see far less motivation and far less engagement in our workers, and likely some sort of behavior to either seek these elsewhere or disengage. And that's when we get lower rates of productivity and creativity and innovation. So autonomy is, a lot of these can have multiple different definitions, but I'm going to kind of just tease out some of the keywords. Autonomy really is focused on this human need to be causal agents in our own lives, in our own environments. We want to have the freedom and the control to whatever extent we can, to make decisions, to help be involved in the important questions, the important planning in our job and in our organization. Competence is a desire to be effective in dealing with our environment, our job, the nature of our work itself, kind of back to that idea of flow. We like being good at what we're good at, and we like always being able to improve on those types of things. And then finally, relatedness really taps into more of the social aspect here. We tend to have a desire to interact with and connect with other people and also care for other people. Most often we see employees experience much higher rates of engagement if they are shown how their work impacts other people, how it helps other people. So sort of keeping that in mind in the context of this conversation, one of the biggest recommendations that we as IO psychologists emphasize from sort of a broad framework perspective is the importance of paying attention to this interplay with demands, job demands, the resources that employees may or may not have, and then the degree of control that's available or evident in the organization or the job. So minimizing demands wherever possible is, of course, going to be beneficial to the employee. Trying to identify those demands, seeking input from your employees, that is going to help alleviate certain levels of stress and potentially dissuade some of those feelings of languishing. Resources, of course, wherever possible, we want to be providing our employees with resources. For remote employees especially, the technological aspect of these types of jobs are often absolutely vital and critical to any sort of task accomplishment or fulfillment. So making sure that they are provided for in those ways and other ways. And then finally, back to that idea of autonomy, giving employees whatever degree possible the control over their own work structure, their own work schedules, perhaps. This is going to typically be a negotiation between the employer and the employee, and I'll touch on that in the interview conversation a little bit later in the presentation. But open communication is really key here. But from a practical perspective, it's really vital to try to figure out how to measure and assess these things in our organization. Leveraging certain tools can be an excellent way to fairly quickly and easily get the information and the data that you're looking for your specific organization. So Chris, if you could advance. One of the ways that we have seen this in practice, in applied research, is really emphasizing this need for feedback and recognition for employees. Feedback, of course, is going to be critical for employees having some sort of metric or understanding of how well they're performing, how well they're doing in multiple aspects of their job performance. But in addition to that, feedback shouldn't just be critical negative feedback, of course. It is also important to highlight the positive and the kind of over and above behaviors, the accomplishments, highlight the accomplishments that employees are experiencing, and recognizing these things, recognizing the hard work and the dedication that remote employees especially are putting into their jobs and their work can go a really long way to boosting feelings of engagement and identification and commitment with their teams and with their organizations. We've seen certain organizations can implement certain types of like shout out types of structures or recognition structures where not only leadership can highlight, wins and accomplishments, but also fellow employees, kind of calling each other out on how well you're doing, and accomplishments and big wins can be a huge morale booster for individual employees and also just collectively for a team and for an organization. Celebrating our work and celebrating our impact and our purpose as an organization can really, really boost feelings of job-related self-efficacy and also help support and forge some of those social bonds between employees. So building connections to highlight these types of things is going to be a huge advantage for an organization. Whether it's internal, like I just mentioned with shout outs, or connecting to your clients and customer base, getting reviews and sharing them with the team, getting clients or customers to maybe submit email or even video testimonials of how the organization's work has helped them and impacted them can be a dramatic change agent for employees. And these types of things, this kind of culture that we're talking about building here with feedback and open communication and recognition can elevate levels of what we call psychological safety. And psychological safety is this feeling that employees, as a part of their team, as a part of their organization, feel comfortable to take risks and to communicate feedback of multiple types to their leaders and feel comfortable doing so and not like they will be punished or embarrassed in any way. And much of the time we see that by fostering this community mindset, this really collaborative and growth-oriented mindset can skyrocket levels of organizational commitment, and not just individual growth, but collective growth, which tends to lead to positive outcomes that we all want to see with individual employees and with our group, our organization as a whole.
Awesome. Thanks, Riley. So Chris, can you put up let's do another poll. So we're going to get into how we use our Microsoft tools to increase employee engagement. So I'd like to see how effectively everyone on the call is using your current tools for employee engagement. So if y'all don't mind answering that. And while we wait for the results to come in, we're going to talk through Microsoft Teams and Viva Engage. So again, both are Microsoft tools that we utilize at PTG to increase our communication and collaboration among teams. Something that we're really proud of. Okay, so let's see. Results are in. So 20% at 2, 40% at 3, and 40% at 4. So let's, again, goal is to try and get these numbers up to 5. So like I said, we're really proud of what we've done at PTG. Last year, we decreased our turnover by 10%. And then our employee net promoter score was 76, which is pretty close to best in class. So 80 is best in class. Our goal this year is to get to 80, and I'm really confident that we will get there. So how do we do this? So Chris, can you go to the next slide? So if you're not utilizing Teams right now, if you have Microsoft and you're not utilizing Teams, I highly suggest. It's so easy, and it's really easy to set up and get started. So Teams within Teams is our go-to for communication and collaboration at PTG. We have one channel that everyone is part of, and that's where we have work-related announcements, company updates, etc. You can see we have ours named All Company. You can come up with a fun name or just leave it basic as All Company. But everyone is able to interact with the posts that we have in there, which allows for more conversations and connections. Especially we love when we have like a new hire announcement, we put it in there and everyone likes to say welcome, and it just makes people feel welcomed and really good about being part of the team. So we break it down by department and have separate department channels. So this allows for more direct conversations around specific topics within that department. So the examples I gave here is finance team, project managers. You can do whatever you need that's going to work for your team. You can also make sure that you grant. Not everyone's going to have access to all of these. You can grant access based off of someone's role. But what's cool about this is people can have these chats throughout the day that need immediate attention. People aren't always looking right at their emails, but this chat is going to ping up if people are chatting within these teams. If there's a message that you think is important and you want it to be saved, you can also pin that message to the top so that people can refer back to it at all times. And then your team, they can just interact with these chats, not only through typed conversations, but it's almost kind of like a Facebook where you can give thumbs ups, hearts, likes, send gifts, all those fun things. I don't know about your teams at PTG, we're like obsessed with gifts. We send them constantly all day, every day to each other. So it's just a fun way for people to show that kind of fun side and creativity. And then individual chat. So this is going to kind of touch on a lot of things that Riley was just talking about, but individual chats is just a great place to store important conversations and to-dos with someone. So one-on-one conversations, self-reviews, stay interviews, which Riley is going to talk about in a little bit. These can all be stored in the file section of a chat. So you and that team member, you can refer back to them at any time. One-on-ones, they're just so important. It's just a great way to keep connections with your team member. So Riley touched on this earlier, like what employees are looking for to feel fulfilled. And these conversations are where you can find that information out and make sure that team member is engaged. I think we sometimes forget that not everyone is one size fits all. Everyone has different motivational factors. So these one-on-ones is where you're going to find that information out. And a lot of times people will do like a Word document of a one-on-one, and then it just kind of floats away into space, and we don't know where to find it, or we can't refer back to it. If you're saving it in the files in that individual chat, that's there real time for employees to be able to go to, for you to be able to go to at any time. Both you and that employee can edit it as you see fit. So I highly suggest using those individual chats. So we also make sure that we gather feedback from our employees through Microsoft Forms. So Chris, it looks like you just went to, yeah, there we go. So we use Microsoft Forms at PTG. You can also store those forms within individual chats as well. But forms are where we do like engagement surveys, stay interviews, and self-reviews. And then, like I said, we will file it under the individual chats for that employee. And it just makes it easy to find it. So these are the basics that we're using. If you're not using these already, I highly encourage you to do this. It's just a very easy thing to get set up and to get you started in the right track, to making sure that you are having increased communication with your employees. So Chris, you can go to the next slide. So praise is like my favorite feature in Teams. So with praise, you can send kudos to your team members for doing a great job. People want that feedback. They want that cookie at the end of the day that you did a really great job and I really appreciate you. So at PTG, we actually took it a step further and we gamified our praise. So we tied praise to our company values. And when an employee does a stellar job of living out one of our values, our team members can send praise detailing what they did. I have them do like a hashtag of like what value the employee is living out, and it's just kind of a fun way to figure out like where are we trending the highest as far as which value is trending the highest. I'll do like monthly challenges. So coming up in March, not to give away what the next challenge is going to be, but we're going to do a praise for, or we're going to do a challenge that anyone that sends a praise around our value of innovative gets double the points that they normally would. And so basically with that, the points, so they are, we have points for each praise that is sent. I track those, and then employees are able to save those points and use them towards a bonus payout, gift cards, or tangible items. We have like a store basically that they can go to, and they can reimburse their points for any of those items there. So it's been fun. Last year was the first year that we did this. We had really high engagement with it. What I love about it is it's not just managers giving that feedback and that praise, it's the teams rewarding each other, it's their peers. And so it just builds this really great like camaraderie and just people having each other's backs. And managers don't always see what everyone's doing day to day. So it's nice that everyone is empowered to be able to reward their other team members. So it's been a huge success, and we love it. And again, praise is something that everyone can interact with. So it's really great when you see someone post such a nice praise, and then people are commenting under it, being like, "Way to go! That's awesome! You crushed it." Again, sending gifts because we love gifts. So it's been really fun for us, and it puts the power in our team's hands, which is nice. So we can go to the next slide. So next we have Viva Engage, which is also through Microsoft. This is another fun feature where you can create communities for your teams to talk about the things that they love. So we have a pet community, gamers, you can imagine IT, gamers is our most popular community. Sports, checkmate for all of our team members that love to play chess. And it just allows you to talk through things that you love, make connections about those things that you love, and take just a minute through like crazy day and just chill and relax and talk to people. Put an example of what I put up in the pets chat, a picture of my dog digging through his toy pile. And it's just, again, it's something that allows employees to connect on a personal level with people, make those friendships and talk through things that aren't just work related. So these tools are really, really easy to get up and running. And if you don't have, you don't have to be an IT person to start utilizing them. I am not very tech savvy, but I was able to manage this and run this. So I highly recommend using these. If you've not done anything like this before, it's going to require leadership to start the trend and get people posting and get comfortable with doing this. I don't just expect you to say, okay, hey guys, we're going to do praise. Everyone go praise each other. You really have to build this up and build some communication around it, and then lead the way and show your teams like what you want them doing. But then eventually they will get to a place. And like I said, our engagement, I think last year we had like 691 praises sent, which is amazing, incredible. So it's something that is just really fun for our teams. But again, you'll eventually see that engagement increase, and your teams will hopefully be thrilled about that. Just one thing I want to make sure that you are aware of. So all of these tools that I talk through, there are an abundance of resources through Microsoft's website that you can look at and you can, research how to do this. But if you are a PTG customer, I highly suggest talking to your account manager about how you can best leverage these tools and ensure you have them set up properly. They're here to support you and make sure that this is something that is going to make sense. And I'm also happy, if you're talking with your PTG account manager, I'm also happy to step in and assist you with how we kind of went about this at PTG. So with that, I will pass it on to Riley.
Thanks, Molly. So I think a lot of what Molly just talked about too and touched on is completely in line with our sort of rolling theme with this discussion. I think some of the practical recommendations and real sort of on the ground issues that organizations face, especially with remote workers, are very, very open to being addressed by fairly simple tactics and processes that we can instill in the routine and the expectations of the organization itself. So partly where that starts is planning. Planning when and how to do these, having an understanding of how do we as an organization, how do we as a team, however the structure kind of plays out for you specifically, when do we want to do this? How do we want to do it? And once you find that plan, once you agree on a plan and you have involved the appropriate stakeholders and voices, be consistent. That's not to say be rigid and don't adjust anything going forward, but be consistent and give that plan a chance to work. Sometimes we can get impatient with timing or format or types of questions and switch up a routine before it's appropriate to do so. So I think that's also where some of these tools are really helpful because it can provide some structure and some routine and some predictability to a lot of these mechanisms. One of the biggest recommendations for leaders that I tend to endorse and give is being the one to proactively request feedback. Employees aren't going to be comfortable or feel comfortable, at least initially, to approach their own leaders with suggestions, ideas, critiques, this type of thing. So by making those cultural and social norms within your organization very, very clear and demonstrating them and modeling them, that's going to be a much more effective way of communicating these values and these expectations to your employees. Words can be cheap sometimes. I'm sure we've all heard this saying, but actions are really vital here, especially. And this idea of action planning and sitting down and figuring out, once you get that feedback from your employees, what are some meaningful changes we can actually institute? Again, back to this idea of kind of aligning these goals and plans as personally as possible with individual employees. That's going to be where these one-on-one meetings, these one-on-one interviews are going to be critical. And not just in things like performance evaluation meetings or even specific project check-in meetings, but trying to set up opportunities for one-on-one conversations with your employees to gather some information about how they are engaging or not with their work in the organization. And what are their plans? What are their honest plans for staying with the company or not? Oftentimes, when we see organizations suffer from large rates of turnover, or frankly, variable rates of turnover, they often will rely on exit interviews to gather information on what went wrong, what was not sufficient, what caused this employee to leave, what could we have done differently in the past so that you wouldn't have left. And they're posing these questions to this employee that's already out the door or very close to out the door. And that's too late in the timeline. What a better tactic and what we're seeing far more effective outcomes from is what some people call stay interviews. These have kind of different cool cutesy names depending on the organization. Some will call them engagement check-ins, which I think is also a clever name, but it is a meeting specifically surrounding the employee's experience of their work right now. These can also be instituted early on in the employment process and the employment tenure. Shortly after you hire someone, you can sort of have your first check-in or interview, whatever you want to call it, and establish what the employee's goals are. What do they want to, how do they want to grow? What are their plans for the future at this organization and as a professional? What types of goals and accomplishments and objectives are specifically relevant to them? What about this work is tying them to this occupation in itself? What about this organization drew them to come work here? And those themes, those same questions can also apply in stay interviews. So some questions that might be effective in a stay interview are things like, are you getting to your goals? Do you feel like you are making the progress that you wanted to make here when we spoke that first time? What are some challenges to your work? If you could change anything about your work, what would it be? So having a set of questions that really tries to analyze and dig into multiple aspects of the job. But the key here is that leadership is absolutely critical. This really needs to be a grassroots, genuine effort on behalf of leadership to have an honest conversation with their employees on what could be, what's going really well, what could maybe use some changes, and what's going poorly. Of course, we're not going to always be able to fix every single problem, and certainly it might be a process depending on the nature of the conversation, the nature of the feedback. But it's about opening that door to being flexible and being open to looking in the mirror as a leader, as an organization. So it's really, really important to have that element at the core of these conversations. And depending on your preferences, these can happen as often as it makes sense for your team. This could be, we often see like once every 2 to 3 months. We could see once a quarter. I think that also is part of that early conversation. How often do we feel like these are necessary? And again, having an element of flexibility is going to be helpful here too. But some of these tactics and strategies, we can find resources in a number of different places. One that I often recommend is the Society for Human Resource Management. They have a lot of really great question sets, example questions, best practice recommendations as well that are available online. But there's a lot of potential for these types of structures and implementing them with your employees. So hope that this information has been helpful from a psychological perspective. I'll pass it back to Molly.
Yeah, well, so like Riley said, hopefully this information has been helpful. If you have any questions, now's the time. If you want to come off mute, ask some questions. Let's see, let's see. So what are your thoughts on using employee tracking technology? Though it helps manage a remote team, I feel it can also undermine organizational trust. So when you say employee tracking technology, do you mean like security tracking? And Ben, you can come off mute if you want. Oh, making sure they are working. That's a good question. I mean, I think there's different ways that you can go about this. At PTG, how we make sure our teams are working are just like their skill assessments, and are they, completing a certain number of tickets? Are like, how many calls are they making? I do agree. I think there could be some level of trust that's lost there. And I think that's where those one-on-one conversations with your employee are so important, to make sure that you're staying on top of, their to-dos and their goals. And if you're seeing someone fall behind, that's where the one-on-one is where you really want to build the trust. I feel that, and maybe Riley, you might disagree with me on this. I just feel that if you're using that technology without having the conversations, you're not building a space for there to even be trust. I think you need to have the conversations first, and then if someone's underperforming, maybe we'll start to go into using technology like that. But I firmly believe having those conversations first and talking through things on, I'd say, weekly basis is where we should start.
Yeah, I agree. I think that shared decision making, and I think sometimes it's really helpful too, especially from like a tools perspective, to have it accessible in some way to the employee too, like being able to see our own progress or lack thereof in some sort of format or context that we have helped create. We were part of this design early on, so we knew that we were going to be a part of this progress tracking or however it might be sort of labeled or framed, that provides us with some feedback to ourselves at the same time. So you have this kind of dual feedback from your leader, and also you can see it in front of you in some way. We tend to know when we're struggling in that way, and that can lead to more conversations. I think that's also the point, is that it's not about like punishing or sort of this big brother mentality. It's about, where are we experiencing hurdles and how can we work together to address them.
Yeah. So then, Riley, it looks like we have another question. So you mentioned, and this one's question for Riley, you mentioned employees' need / demand for well-being and taking time during work hours for personal things. In the long run, does this help or hurt employee productivity? I think it's hard for employees to let go of the idea of standard 9 to 5 work weeks to allow this level of flexibility.
This is a great question, and this is a question that we get from a lot of organizations. So in general, umbrella recommendation, I highly do. I typically recommend some sort of flexibility when it comes to work hours and work scheduling. So what I mean by that is that some employees are going to prefer to maybe crank out all their work in a condensed amount of hours, skip lunch, no breaks. They just want to get everything done and then get off early. If it is suitable to the organizational structure and the work is getting done, in a lot of cases, we don't see a reason why not. I think you're spot on in this idea of the standard 9 to 5 work week, and I think just traditionally we have kind of relied on that as some sort of metric for, well, they're here, surely they're working, and that's not the case. You can absolutely have a phenomenon of what we call presenteeism and social loafing, these types of things where you may be present but you're not engaging, and engagement is of course the key. But that being said, it doesn't have to be hours at a time. Even implementing micro breaks, 10, 15 minutes to just get up, get away from your desk, go get something, go get a glass of water, go make yourself some lunch, step outside for a few minutes, whatever, play with your dog, whatever it might be, that can be remarkably helpful for remote workers. And I think giving them flexibility to kind of schedule those as they see fit is also important, because if they're in the zone and working, it might not be the time for a break, but they can kind of determine that on their own a lot of the time. But psychologically and from a mental fatigue standpoint, that is going to be extremely helpful for boosting engagement and boosting focus and attention.
All right. Well, any more questions that anyone has? Okay. Well, with that, so Riley and my contact information is on the end of this slide. Also, one of our account managers' contact information is on the end of this slide. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Josh, me, or Riley. Happy to help and assist with any of this. Again, we know how important, we're really passionate about employee engagement. Being that you're on this call, I hope that means that you're also really passionate about employee engagement. It's so important. And it just makes for a better experience for our employees, and we want to take care of our teams. So hopefully you were able to learn a few things from this, and can take some of the tools that we talked about and utilize them with your teams going forward. But we hope everyone has a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
All right,
Thanks, everyone.